We reconvene for Liberty Conspiracy Live here on Rokfin, on Rumble, on YouTube/YouTube, and on Twitter/X. Nice to have you here, fellow conspirators, because freedom is out of fashion nowadays. We're going to break apart the news as we do Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, welcoming you to contribute ideas, links, suggestions, opinions, and overall jokes as well, as we try to turn their political frowns upside down. Thanks for hanging out, everybody, on the good ship Freedom. Because, yes, freedom is out of fashion nowadays, and we're plotting and planning and crouching and conspiring to help spread the word about individual liberty, free will, freedom of association, and peace. And take those news stories and derive some long-standing intellectual ammunition that we can then apply to other instances like these breaking news stories, taking the contemporary things, looking at historical stories, looking at economics and philosophy and so on. I'm Gardner Goldsmith. Thanks for being here. The whole team says hello from Mother Russia as we spread the Russian propaganda on this wonderful day in July. The 10th of July, 2024, here in Russia. It is also the 10th of July, 2024. And I'm really glad you're here, everybody. I got to say hi to some of the folks in the Rumble chat already as the theme was going. I had an extra second. I was like, oh, it's super colorful. It's great. So I went in and said hi, and thanks for being there. Please spread the word. Give it the thumbs up while we're live, and spread it to friends if you get the opportunity. Sort of like the bird flu, my friends. You know what I'm saying? It's a very dangerous thing. You don't want the freedom virus to get around. Just trust me. I love that AI generated voice that David Knight plays with the graphics that he and probably Travis worked on. Just wonderful stuff. It's hilarious. It's like, you don't want to spread the David Knight show. It's classic. Oh, man. Trust me. I mean, the science. Inside X, thanks for being there. And it's really interesting to watch the numbers rise on X. If you are watching on X and you want to be able to recycle, retweet, re-exit, terminator exit, whatever, just go to my @GardGoldsmith feed, and then you'll see it there, and then you can retweet it there if that's easy for you. And then click on the actual wording for it, and that'll bring you right to the live thing. You put your comments in. I can see those there. See the comments inside Rokfin. Want to say right off the bat, a big hello. I also got to say hi to you with the amazing multicolored greetings from Brian and Deb McCartney. Thank you so much. Right there at the first people who left a comment. I really appreciate that. God evening, Guard, and all of Rock Fam. And boy, it feels great. I really am so glad that I'm here with you. And they say here, just picked up our farm fresh veggie box, and it is wonderful. Fresh carrots, had some today. Snap peas. Oh, great stuff. Beans, celery, onions, cucumbers, zucchini, and kohlrabi. I don't know what kohlrabi is. I don't know what that is. Is that like Kohl's meets a rabbi? I don't know. It doesn't have two B's, but kohlrabi. You'll have to tell me what kohlrabi is. That's interesting. And you also have to tell me if it spreads the bird flu, because if you're going to have it, you trust the science. Don't touch the kohlrabi. Yeah, that's for sure. Also want to say hi to Freegan and Blake. And Blake says, I'm thrilled to be on time to today's parade. Okay, Blake, the colors are there. It's very pink, and I notice you're using pink inside Rumble. And also inside YouTube, thanks for being there as well. And we were getting a number of more subscribers over YouTube, even though YouTube probably does a lot of things to keep the word very on the QT. You know what I'm saying? Because we talk about a lot of stuff that evidently YouTube doesn't dig. And by the way, we're going to get into that subject tonight. So let's see what's on tap tonight, everybody, for this July 10th, 2024. It is a big night tonight. Genesis. Tonight, the news flash. It's the Lawrence O'Donnell lays down the law edition. Yes. Then we're going to be looking at Viktor Orban as he tries to broker peace. And, of course, gets rejected like some guy going up against Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Kareem's going to swat that basketball away very quickly. Yes, he's trying, but he's getting swatted away by the U.S. and NATO. Yes, Biden celebrates NATO's 75th anniversary. Oh, that's great. Yeah, I remember. I was around when NATO started. And I don't know if you remember, it was back in the black and white days. But I remember when they created it, they said, "It's alive! It's alive!" It was great. They had lightning bolts come down, and Boris Karloff had to wear 80 pounds of makeup to play NATO. But it was cool, It's one of my favorite horror movies. It's just keeps giving and giving, the chills, thrills, and blood spills. Then we'll be looking at, yes, of course, that other aspect of it. As Biden celebrates NATO 75, he awards Stoltenberg. Seriously. So I had a few things to say about that, and I'm sure you do too. So get ready, my friends. We're going to get the word out. And of course, if you want the word to spread about what you have to say as well, and you think this is a good platform to do it, feel free to get your comments in. I love to see them. I can see them on X now as well. And I will try to read as many of them as I can for the people who watch the show or listen to the show later on. They will hear these comments. And so let's make it a good team effort. I really appreciate it. Number 3 on our agenda tonight is the Global Alliance for Responsible Media. And that is the item to which I am connecting you to, because you will see how it is connected. The acronym for it is GARM, not GARD, GARM. And I think you know what they're up for. Yep, they're up for corporations and government teaming up to censor you more. Who's the good censored person? You are. Isn't that great? Yeah, that's awesome. It's for your protection. Shut up. It's for your protection. Then we've got Israel taking over nearly 1/3 of Gaza. You probably have heard about that story. And if you visit antiwar.com or you watch Redacted, you probably heard about that. If you watch Russell Brand, they also discussed that today. Cuban government busts Americans for attempted terror coup. Not seeing that story pretty much anywhere. This is a major story. This is big. So I've got some very interesting information to give you on that one. This has just happened, although it's sort of been brewing for a number of months. We'll give you the background on it and give you some background as number 6. We'll wrap things up tonight, the team and I here at The Conspiracy. We'll wrap things up tonight by looking at some history in 2 forms. One, from the Mises Institute, the dark starts of welfare-statism in the United States, and 2, from a very well-known, very cool dude. You might have heard of him, Thomas Sowell. So I'll be reading something from Thomas Sowell's most recent book. I think you'll dig it, and I think it's appropriate to bring that up and package it. Again, because at Liberty Conspiracy, I try to take the news and break out some stories that are long-standing lessons that enrich us, that aren't just the breaking flash news stories. We look at the flash news stories. Sometimes we laugh at them, but hopefully we derive something that's valuable that we can carry away and hand to others, some wisdom or the start of wisdom that we hope we can grab. It's very difficult to judge one's own wisdom, isn't it? But when you see another wise person, that's pretty cool. Like I was just communicating with David via text today. I was like, thank you for your ministry, David. Really appreciate it. So thanks for being there, everybody. And let's get off to a very, very big start by visiting that house in Alston, Massachusetts on Gardner Street. And the film, you got it, Skippy Benderman as Skippy. Yes, good old Skippy says to us something very important about the evening. Hey, he knows you guys.
Wait a minute. I know you guys. You're from the news flash.
To allow the candidates to have as many staff as they want, join them on the stage throughout the debate, and make sure that all of them have microphones. And the candidates should be allowed to turn to their staffs and confer with them about anything.
There has been an unexplained and alarming growth in the prevalence of chronic illnesses and health problems, especially in children.
This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever.
The American public is not going to move away from me as an average voter. And again, I'm here for 2 reasons, pal. One, to rebuild the economy for hard-working middle-class people, give everybody a shot. Just a straight shot, 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 shot.
On the run, to the outside of everything. Sabotage. They must succumb to a secret understanding.
I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been, you know?
Yes, my friends, the news flash has begun. So let's take another glance at Lawrence O'Donnell. We came in on the news flash just having the man who plays Skippy Vinterman say, wait a minute, I know you guys. You're from the news flash. A little different approach tonight. Some people might have felt a little unsettled by that. They might feel a little unsettled by this because, yes, Lawrence O'Donnell, Mr. Tough Guy, stop the hammering. Well, evidently, Lawrence O'Donnell would like to hammer the fact that he doesn't make any sense and just continue to hammer that into the eyes of everybody. Have your retinas absorbed enough of Lawrence O'Donnell already? Mine have. Yeah, my eyes have seen the glory of not Lawrence O'Donnell. That's for sure. I don't want to see any more of him. Lawrence O'Donnell, rather than actually discussing the problem of Joe Biden's cognition, is saying, well, you see, the president doesn't matter. He's actually acknowledging what really matters is the staff who actually run everything for a clearly mind problematic person who has probably degenerative brain disease. So that's always very reassuring, isn't it? Just feels great to know that Lawrence O'Donnell's got it all figured out. So he wants to change the rules for presidential debates because really, what does it matter if the president doesn't know, how much he wants to tax you? He actually said that. I didn't have that scene recorded, but he actually said that. It's like, what does it matter whether he can remember what the top marginal tax rate is? Well, since he's probably proposing what the top marginal tax rate is, and it's part of his policy, maybe he ought to friggin' know because he's picking my stinking pocket there, Lawrence. How about that? How about some people might want to, I don't know whether or not the president of the United States who's lording it over them and claiming he's so cool and has the power to launch nuclear weapons. How about maybe, just maybe, they might want to know whether the guy has all his faculties. Clearly, most of these people are egotistical enough that I'd be much more comfortable if they just pulled a Zaphod Beeblebrox and went wandering around in the universe and the galaxy with the Heart of Gold spaceship. At least then they wouldn't be dangerous. Unbelievable. So here he is again, everybody. Check it out. Oh, what a classy dude he is.
To allow the candidates to have as many staff as they want, join them on the stage throughout the debate, and make sure that all of them have microphones. And the candidates should be allowed to turn to their staffs and confer with them about anything.
I've said it for years now. He's cogent. Mm-hmm. But I undersold him when I said he was cogent. He's far beyond cogent.
Oh, yeah. Now, everybody, let's do a little something special for you here. I had the opportunity to check out Russell Brand today. And Russell Brand was terrific because he played that Joe Biden on with Scarborough and Mika. And you could see how Scarborough now is taking it very seriously now. There's just been a very big misunderstanding, as probably in the back of his mind, he's like, so are they going to be pushing Kamala now? How long can we continue to cover for this? Are we going to continue to cover for this? We were waiting for our signals from the puppet masters. So which way are we going to go? Are we going to continue with the past week or so of alarmism? Or are we going to continue to cover up the way I've been covering up for years for Joe Biden? I don't know. I need my signals. So he and Mika, they're both in their dark outfits. They're very serious on the Morning Joe. And who wouldn't want to wake up to that? Yes, indeed. Talk about coyote ugly. That's for sure. Both of those people on that show are ugly from the inside out. That's what I would say. So I got to tell you, it was very interesting because you could just see that they're just being quiet for now. They're just being quiet and they're letting the hierarchy within the Democrat Party and the Biden administration make their moves. And so they had Joe on, and Joe was talking about how, it was a bad day, it was a bad night, day, night. What's the difference, as they say on Repo Man? What does it matter, right? Doesn't matter. Whatever time zone you call home, especially if you're the president, he can imagine he's in time zone Z. It doesn't matter, I came back from Oz. I clicked my heels. I don't know how it works. So anyway, so Russell Brand, he did a great job, because not only did Joe Biden sit there and talk about, we got to give everybody a shot. Yeah, he's getting down home, take you behind the gym and beat you up sort of attitude, like he really sticks up for the average guy. If only the average guy could get hooked up the way his average coke addict son could get hooked up, and they could all get jobs with Burisma after the overthrow of an entire government. I'm sure most of average people would just really love that honest work that they could get. It would be just fantastic. And of course, 10% would go to the big guy. But Russell, he played a little bit more of the Joe Mika Joe sandwich. And boy, he nailed it, because wait till you hear how Joe tries to represent himself, of course, as one of the people who not only is the fighter for the little guy, but now he really dislikes a particular cadre of the American governmental system. He's with us.
Prescribed dig. Now, after this sort of botched appearance, Jake Tapper gets stuck in.
The American public is not going to move away from me as an average voter. And again, I'm here for two reasons, pal. One, to rebuild the economy for hard-working middle-class people, give everybody a shot. Just a straight shot. Everybody
Shot!
gets a fair shot.
Like sort of...
Would that be an mRNA shot? Make sure everybody gets a shot. I could have put that in. Could have put in the COVID shots and the mandates, the trucker mandates, the military mandates, if you get government money, you're going to be mandated. All the people who lost their jobs, all the people who got injected and then died very rapidly, or now have long-term problems and could die very sad deaths in the future. The people who are trying to manage after they got the shots. And that is not just to lay blame only on Joe Biden, of course, but of course we need to recognize the wonderfulness of his greatness, the golfer extraordinaire, Donald Trump. By the way, want to say hi to a cult priestess. Going to text you later tonight, cool lady, inside Rokfin. Let me know if the sound is okay for y'all. Let's continue with Russell. Here we go.
Miles, like shot, or like that's in the musical Hamilton as well, like sort of leaning into that. This is sort of obviously an attempt to sound, what do I want to say, pugilistic and sort of bellicose and punchy, but he can't sustain it.
Number one. Number two, remember all this talk about how I don't have the black support? Come on, give me a break. Come with me, watch.
Watch me among the black people of the world. They love me. I'm like a black messiah.
Those black people. I love the way the guy is supposedly not a racist, but always views things through the lens of skin color or class or whatever it is. Remember what he said about Indian people? You can't walk into a 7-Eleven without hearing an Indian accent or whatever. Now, an average person, that might be true. I knew a dude who came from India. He owned 2 7-Elevens. I talked to him, right? He was a cool guy. Right? Whatever. Who cares, right? But to constantly play up the racial stuff and then through a left-handed ways try to compliment people, or in this case, with the black community, whatever the heck that is. I guess Thomas Sowell isn't part of that since he doesn't stand for the government's assignment of welfareism onto the black community, supposedly. I guess Walter Williams wouldn't have been part of that either, right? I guess Charles Barkley in many cases wouldn't be either. So many people that they try to assign to certain cadres of America so they can play off them and get their votes and give them all sorts of benefits and stuff and get the people promoted into certain positions who will then be voice boxes for the community that, of course, support Joe Biden. Did Joe Biden happen to mention to Mika and Morning Joe that, he's got that black support from, I don't know, maybe some of the guys who are spending life in prison because he wrote the 3 strikes law back in the 90s. And he proudly said that he wrote the 3 strikes law. 3 felonies and you go to prison for life. And that, of course, disproportionately affected a lot of black dudes who were poorer, especially around LA, and they started to get high-speed chases because they were just simply involved in non-violent drug sales, but they were felonious. So if they got their third one, then they would go to prison for life. Let's hear that again.
Middle class people give everybody a shot. Just a straight shot. Everybody
Shot!
gets a fair chance.
Like sort of 8 miles, like shot, or like that's in the musical Hamilton as well, like sort of leaning into that. This is sort of obviously an attempt to sound, what do I want to say, pugilistic and sort of bellicose and punchy, you know, but he can't sustain it.
Number one. Number two, remember all this talk about how I don't have the black support. Come on, give me a break. Come with me, watch.
Watch me among the black people of the world. They love me. I'm like a black messiah. So what about that lady that he sort of like went out of his way to not cuddle that black lady that was between 2-1? I think he cuddled her a little later, but it looked like a cuddle with conditions. He was shaking someone else's hand a little bit, looking the other way. I don't know, Joe. I don't know that you are sort of the new Muhammad Ali.
Watch. I'm getting so frustrated by the elites. No, I'm not talking about you guys, but about the...
How can Joe Biden be talking about elites? Like,
I guess just Russell Brand's reaction was just so natural. Like, how can you have Joe Biden talking about elites?
If the president of the United States is talking about elites, like that's the whole discourse. This is like when I get accused of being a controlled opposition. I'm like, hold on, because I know I'm not controlled opposition. So if we're all subject to that, like if Joe Biden has got a category of those damn elites, they've held me and Hunter back, I'd have got him an even better job at Burisma. And even better deals with Chinese organizations and groups while in the office of vice president. Who are these elites? I mean, we know that the deep state and a set of global and corporate interests ultimately control America, but Joe Biden talking about it as if it's something that, I'm pissed off with this, rather than he's a sort of compliant participant within that system, is extraordinary. Then Jake Tapper goes on to use the same language. Now, if you're watching us on YouTube, we're going to leave you now.
All right, so I'll just pause it there. So in the meantime, you got Lawrence O'Donnell showing that Joe Biden is propped up by the elites because he doesn't want Joe Biden going on to the debates alone. Oh, man, it's just so classic. It's just great. Oh, wow. All right, that's let me know if the sound is good, by the way, folks. I didn't get to check in. I'm over at Rumble right now. We got Freegan, by the way, good musical note here to inject. Misfits by the Kinks, vastly underrated. And of course, the band The Misfits, vastly underrated as well. And we got Risha M is in there. Hi, Risha. Great to see you. I like it. Oh, wow. I hope you're I hope you're doing all right there, Risha. Yeah, I hope you're doing all right. And also inside Rokfin. Very cool to have everybody there. Again, let me know how the sound is. That would be really cool. And Brian De McCartney, Harry Hart. Awesome, everybody. JB. Hey, JB Morrison inside Rokfin. Anybody wants to meet the real JB, you go inside Rokfin. You know what I'm saying? JB's got the cigar and he's going, hey, how you doing? I'm JB. How are you? I'll see you in Vegas. I'll make you a star. Well, I don't know. He's got the star on his avatar from Rush, which is pretty darn cool. I dig that. And let's get into the next part of this because, yes, everybody, as Joe Biden is talking to folks via his phone and telling them how great he is, he also is telling other folks how great they are on this, the 75th anniversary of NATO. Yeah. So let's take the opportunity to celebrate the peace lovers at NATO with a wonderful theme coming to us from the fake band that is XTC. You know them, you gotta love them. They are the Dukes of Stratosphere with the theme of the United States and NATO. My love explodes all over the world. Yeah, baby. Yes, the Dukes of Stratosphere, and a couple takeaways from the last video segment that we saw as we make our transition, as we transition, as they often use that term, into the war portion of the show.
Like the stars up in space for
Yeah, for you, just you. Oh, America, NATO, you gotta love it. All right, the two main takeaways for me from the last segment are, of course, Joe Biden's claiming that he's not one of the elites, but also talking about how he really connects with Black America. So don't forget, of course, one of the key lessons to take away from tonight's show, a quick reminder, Joe Biden claimed that he was the guy who came up with the federal 3 strikes law, patently unconstitutional, and of course, destroyed the lives of thousands of people throughout the 90s, including many people who were innocent people who got caught in front of super fast chases. A lot of injuries and deaths just because of those. So Joe Biden claimed credit for that back in the day, and now he's saying that he really identifies with you, as Henry Rollins would say. Yes, indeed. Otherwise, a lyric from the song Liar. So let's go to the war part of this. After we check out and file those 2 stories into the brain there, then we'll go into the Liberty Conspiracy brain on this one. Biden celebrating NATO, the 75th anniversary of NATO. Get this. Here we go. Biden opens NATO summit by announcing new air defenses for Ukraine. Of course. What else are you going to do when you're there celebrating the North Atlantic Treaty Organization but announce that you're going to give weapons to a non-member? Hey, it's awesome. It's just freaking great, isn't it? That's awesome. And it sort of runs along the similar patterns that NATO has been operating under for 25 years at least, saying it represents one thing and then doing something completely different, like saying that it won't encroach into the Iron Curtain nations and then doing the exact opposite, encroaching into the Iron Curtain nations. That's it. It's great. The Frashmacher. It totally perfectly fits. And it gets even worse because not only did they spit in your face and call it rain, they added salt to the wounds that they have been creating for your pocketbook for a long time. Here is the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey might say, from CNN. There are some of the warmongers. Oh, there's Mr. Stoltenberg. Oh, he's just awesome. He's on his way out, but will he ever really go away? I wish. President Joe Biden on Tuesday announced plans to supply new air defenses to Ukraine on your dime in a speech opening the NATO summit. And by the way, it was those air defenses that hit that children's hospital in Kiev. Yeah, when they launched that thing and they tried to claim it was a Russian missile, but you could actually see on the video that it wasn't. Yeah. The U.S., Germany, and Romania will each provide a Patriot battery of their own, while the Netherlands, and who doesn't love the Netherlands nowadays? It's just awesome, will work with other countries to enable an additional Patriot battery. Each country announced in a joint statement. Meanwhile, Italy would also provide a SAMPT long-range air defense system. And I just think it's really appropriate. I don't know about you, but I think it's very, very appropriate for American politicians to be teaming up with foreign politicians and sending out these missile batteries that are called Patriots, because it's very patriotic to have no declared war and be shipping weapons all over the place. It clearly just totally comports with exactly why the American revolutionaries engaged in kinetic combat with the British for all those years. That's awesome. Right after the 4th of July, as we approach Bastille Day on the 14th. Great. Okay, now there's more on this, however. So let's get into a little bit more, because I want to show you what we're seeing coming from first Viktor Orban, as he seems to be quite alone in the EU, and as NATO hates this guy, as he's trying to broker peace between Russia and Ukraine. And of course, guess who shot him down? Not literally, but rhetorically, using words like Patriot missiles against his peace plans, the United States and, yeah, NATO.
Friend of the peace. The reason why I negotiate with Putin, because I'm looking for the shortest and quickest way how to stop this war and create a peace. All the others created a situation when they have no chance to direct communicate with the two main actors, especially with the Russians. Real negotiations cannot happen without the involvement of both parties. So whatever they are doing without him, it means nothing.
I know, it's so fraudulent. They go to Switzerland and they have a so-called peace conference. What do? They don't invite one of the two belligerents, or I should say one of the many belligerents, because, of course, the United States, Germany, Poland, the Netherlands, France, UK, Canada, they're all operating through Ukraine. It's like the great meat grinder, where, of course, the United States and everybody else just turns the grinder while the Ukrainian soldiers get ground up for them. Now, on the NATO topic, let's see some of the pomp and circumstance, everybody. And feel free to give me your opinions on this, because of all things, this is the salt in the wounds. I got some video coverage today that just blew my mind, and I put something out on Twitter about this as well. So we'll give you the Twitter bit in just a second, but let's show you some of this information from RT as they covered the 75th anniversary of NATO.
And while Ukrainians are being mobilized for war, Joe Biden has awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom to the outgoing head of NATO for his steadfastness on the Ukraine.
Yeah. Did you hear that? Yeah. The Presidential Medal of Freedom. So let's just hop over to Twitter/X for a second and just take a quick glance at something here. Might as well just take a quick look. This is what I wrote about NATO, and there's a little video that we're going to see as part of this. I said, surely this video that promotes NATO could be much longer, including the NATO lies, expansion contrary to 1990 era promises made to Russia, weapons smuggling, support for terror organizations, new plans to expand into the Pacific. I said clearly to stop USSR expansion based on its original mission, and manifest proxy war in Ukraine. The U.S. politicians who support this should not be wrapping ribbons around the necks of NATO heads. They might want to look at their vaunted U.S. Constitution and at war crimes history and see their own malfeasance. Happy 75, funded on the backs of people forced to pay for the skullduggery and bloodshed. Now, if you're dropping your comments into any of the sites right now, get ready. We'll go to those comments, but I want to show you this disgusting video about what NATO means. Get ready, my friends. Start up now. It's just at the end.
NATO means a future I can look forward to, knowing we are not alone.
NATO means supporting our Ukrainian friends in times of need. Slava Ukraini!
NATO means our future, stronger together.
NATO means protecting each other for the past 75 years and for the years to come.
NATO means working side by side, every day, civilian and military, to improve our security.
NATO means celebrating our differences and overcoming challenges together.
NATO means living in a free society and a chance to shape our own future.
NATO means serving a greater purpose to protect the ones that I love the most.
The protection of our freedom, our democracy, and what was that last little bit that they had on there? If you're listening in audio, they have a graphic at the end that says the protection of our freedom, our democracy, and our way of life. And as that woman says, it means living in a free society. Hey, when was the last time you were free not to pay for friggin' NATO? How about that? That's cool, huh? That's great. When was the last time you were free not to send weapons to Ukraine or, oh, I don't know, see your taxes used to overthrow Viktor Yanukovych and Hunter Biden and, put into Burisma? How about that? Yeah. Yeah, me too. I don't remember. I can't remember. It's an interesting experience. And I can't even believe this, it's sad. It's sad to me to see some of these people standing in front of the camera and they actually feel comfortable showing their faces. Working for NATO. It just is. It's absurd. It's truly amazing to me. Thinking about all the skullduggery of NATO. It just goes on and on, as the Psychedelic Furs say. Those lyrics from the Psychedelic Furs. This guy that lives downstairs has parties all the time, political parties, where they put on wigs like the Whig Party and stuff so they can be themselves. In other words, they're not being themselves. He calls you this and calls you that. You lose your memory. All this happens all the time, so I don't go down there. Yeah. Let's continue with some more of the wonderful pageantry. The pageantry!
Conflict since 2014, but Biden's speech didn't quite go as planned as he apparently read out some stage instructions by mistake.
Yeah. So we'll get into the stage instruction again, but let's just reiterate the Stoltenberg heading up and on his way out to make way for Rutte. Mark Rutte. Yes, the man coming over from Mr. What would you call him? Is he tilting against windmills from Holland, the Netherlands? I don't know, but he'll be taking Stoltenberg's place, and I'm sure there'll just be such a change. So let's get that opening again.
Conflict.
And while Ukrainians are being mobilized for war, Joe Biden has awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom to the outgoing head of NATO for his steadfastness on the Ukraine conflict since 2014. But Biden's speech didn't quite go as planned as he apparently read out some stage instructions by mistake.
When the Russian war on Ukraine began, you didn't hesitate. Today, NATO is stronger, smarter, and more energized than when you began. I'm pleased to award you the highest civilian honor the United States can bestow, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Ask the military to come forward. I'm asking to read the citation.
Well, while the bloc's members claim it's preventing wars, the NATO gathering has kicked off with the approval of yet another arms package for Kiev. The donation will include Patriot air defense batteries provided by the US, Germany and Romania, as well as SAMP-T launchers from Italy, the only European-made equipment that can intercept ballistic missiles. Washington has also pledged a wide range of tactical tech. And the US top diplomat says NATO's long-awaited F-16 fighter jets are finally heading to Ukraine.
And I'm also pleased to announce that as we speak, the transfer of F-16 jets is underway, coming from Denmark, coming from the Netherlands, and those jets will be flying in the
By the way, I bet you didn't know you'd be seeing trained SEALs on the show.
skies of Ukraine this summer.
Well, Blinken's statement comes just days after Russia struck a military airfield in central Ukraine. Moscow says it destroyed 5 Su-27 fighter jets and damaged several others. The Russian Defense Ministry released this aerial footage showing multiple bomb explosions at the site. I discussed the latest developments with Washington-based outcome modeling analyst John Kavulik. Antony Blinken saying that the F-16 jets are already on their way to Ukraine. So I'm just wondering who's going to be flying, operating and maintaining those jets. And can that...
So just want to pause it here, everybody, because they go into a very interesting angle on this that some of us in some areas probably have heard before, but not applied to the F-16s. But I also want to mention inside Rokfin, Chad, Harry Hart said NATO means war, and other comments in there as well. And I got in there and I said, that's perfectly said, Harry. And Harry also says disgusting. And he says, what's wrong with these people? Satanist. It is just amazing. And it's so constructed on lies. I mean, this is like a balsa wood construction of just pure evil. It's just so crazy. It doesn't hold up. And yet they keep trying to prop it up. I mentioned to David today that, you know, we had the bear came to visit from Russia again today, and he messed with the bird feeder. And I said, you know, he's just working on modern art. He's bending it over, and, you know, perhaps he'll get a CIA funding the way Jackson Pollock did. And I was like, it's like Arthur Dent in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy when he throws the Nutramatic cup. And then later you find out that some wormhole opened up and a distant race heard his anger at the Nutramatic tea dispensing machine when he threw the Nutramatic cup, and they just thought it was beautiful. So they created this statue in which part of its operational system of this giant stone statue, there's a cup suspended in midair. And somebody asks, what keeps the cup up in the sky? And then another person says, oh, the power of art. It's just classic. Douglas Adams was the man. The power of art keeps the cup suspended in midair. It's this giant stone cup. And the name of the statue is Arthur Dent throwing the Nutramatic cup. Put it in a contemporary art gallery. But this is the sort of thing that these people are constructing. It's all based on lies, nothingness, and of course, the feedback money loop for the military-industrial complex and the politicians to get reelected. So here's this additional part of this that I think is quite interesting. All right, so check it out, because when they talk to this person over at RT, he brings up something that I thought about it with other things, but not with the F-16s. I thought about it regarding training and stuff like that, and how long it might take, and so on, and how the United States was sending stuff that wasn't really valuable and so on, and maybe they wanted to get the older stuff out so they could hand new money to the military industrial complex to make new stuff for the U.S. military. Check this out. It's quite interesting.
Explosions at the site. I discussed the latest developments with Washington-based outcome modeling analyst John Kavulik. Antony Blinken saying that the F-16 jets are already on their way to Ukraine. So I'm just wondering who's going to be flying, operating and maintaining those jets, and can that actually be done without direct NATO involvement?
From the 24th of February 2022, when I was in Kharkiv, Ukraine, when the first attacks came, this has always been about semantics. On that day, the Russian Federation could say, we were at war with Ukraine. But soon after that, it's migrated. And it's now, President Putin is able to say that, we're not at war only with Ukraine. We're at war with 32 members of NATO. And he's right about that. NATO doesn't want F-16s to be destroyed, because it's great marketing for the Russian Federation to say, hey, our aircraft down to your aircraft, our aircraft are better. And of course, NATO member countries, the Russian Federation, other countries, everyone's trying to sell military equipment. So no one wants their stuff destroyed. So Ukraine may be keeping the F-16s not as close to where they would like to have them operate, because they're under pressure from NATO and from other countries. Don't risk these aircraft. And so from the Ukrainian standpoint, they're basically getting to the point, well, you want us to keep the Abrams tanks from the U.S. in the background so Russia doesn't have a video of them being destroyed. Now you want us to keep the F-16s. So it is going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out during the next 90 to 120 days. Basically,
just isn't that insane? That's just bizarre. I mean, talk about how twisted can this stuff get, right? PR, marketing, showing videos of their equipment in action, but not getting destroyed. Oh man, it's wag the dog to the nth degree. Oh, a little bit more.
By the time of the U.S. presidential election in November.
Indeed, it will. Let's talk about the Serbian president, Alexander Vucic's comments about Joe Biden, because he accused the U.S. president of double standards over the situations in Ukraine compared to the former Yugoslavia. That's after the U.S. president said that NATO had intervened in the Balkans to restore peace and stop ethnic cleansing. What's your take on that?
It's interesting. President Erdogan yesterday sort of making the same argument that, and he's, has a focus with respect to what's happening in Israel and Gaza, but also Syria. What you're seeing is some of these leaders are saying it seems to be cherry picking what's of interest to NATO, that NATO isn't trying to deal with some of these issues very close by, but they're talking about expansion toward the Pacific, dealing with issues relating to China. And so there are some feelings from some of the heads of state and heads of government that I've spoken to that they feel there is sort of a double standard. One advisor to a head of state yesterday said that, NATO has done more in the last 2 years to bring Russia and China together than it did before, when the goal was to keep them apart.
Well, as the much vaunted 75th anniversary NATO summit is in full swing in the US capital, the bloc isn't wasting any time in taking fresh potshots at China for maintaining relations with Russia. In response, Beijing says the alliance should stop creating imaginary enemies.
NATO's so-called security is more often than not built on others' insecurity, and what it does puts the world and regions at high security risk. We firmly reject NATO's vilification and blame shifting against China. We urge NATO to form the right perception of China, get rid of its Cold War mentality and zero-sum approach, stop scaremongering on security and making imaginary enemies.
75 years later, NATO has been the most successful defensive alliance in the history of the world. It's about preventing wars. It's about deterring conflict. It's about making our people more safe and secure.
RC contributor Carl Jarre is of the view NATO is not acting in defense of its member states, but is rather being used to preserve the dominance of one particular country.
NATO claims its mission is for defense. Confucius says, listen to one's words, but watch one's action. The NATO record for the past 20 years has nothing to do with defense. NATO was involved in Afghanistan, in Libya, and now is involved in supporting a proxy war in Ukraine against Russia. And NATO's performance, it has not been for the security of countries in Europe. It's everything to do with preserved U.S. empire across the globe. And this is why NATO is trying to dip its foot into Pacific. What does North Atlantic Treaty Organization has to do with anything in the Pacific? What security interest of what countries in North Atlantic does China threaten? This is ridiculous. Again, this is just plain pliable lackey to America, to Washington's interest, which is to contain China in Asia. Viktor Orban, he just tweeted a couple of days ago from Beijing. He said China is a key power in creating the condition for peace in the Ukraine conflict. That's why he has come to China on his peace mission. China has offered time and again to be an honest peace broker in the Ukraine conflict. But the NATO country has uniformly, other than Hungary, has uniformly rejected. And it's interesting when Orban is in China, there was no opposition from either Kiev or Moscow. Most of the criticism comes from NATO, from other NATO countries and Washington. And this really lays bare the fact that NATO is not interested in peace.
Well stated. That's absolutely right. And the double standard is just so starkly observable. The idea that for some reason they just don't have a problem moving into the Pacific Ocean, as I mentioned a couple months ago when we first read some about that. I think it was Anti-War that was talking about that. And they have no problem spreading NATO into the Pacific Ocean. But then, of course, there's all this stuff going on with genocide inside the Palestine gates that have been closed down on all those folks in Gaza by the Israelis. And they're not doing anything about that. They're not saying anything about that, while, of course, NATO is involved in a proxy war, claiming that, well, we got to stop the belligerence of Russia after NATO, expanded it the way they said they wouldn't expand. But, that's just the way it goes. And feel free, comments. Let's hop over into Rokfin and say hi to everybody over there. And let's see. Oh, Tom Cooper. Hey, Tom, thanks for being there, man. I wonder what the weather's like where you are right now, man. It was like 90 something degrees outside and pretty hot inside. It was pretty wild. And Harry, good to have you there afterwards, my man. I appreciate your comments as well. And I also saw that Risha M was talking about a family member and a family member who's ill right now. So Risha, I hope and pray that things will work out. I appreciate you being there and also communicating with everybody. Melanie is there. Freegan is there. Lieutenant Oracle of Truth is there. Risha, thanks very much. And I appreciate you being there. And hopefully you get some comforting words from people as you see how things go. Okay. Let me give you the last couple chunks on this news item here, everybody, because I think you might find this interesting. Let's talk a little bit more about NATO, Ukraine, that sort of stuff, and turn to, of course, those very people we discussed, antiwar.com. Dave DeCamp released this yesterday, and the headline reads, if you're just listening, I'll read it for you. NATO report, NATO expected to tell Ukraine its path toward membership is irreversible. The language could be included in a NATO communique that will be issued at the summit in Washington on Wednesday. I haven't seen an update on that, so we'll see. Now, this comes originally from a Politico report that Dave noticed. It goes like this. NATO is likely to tell Ukraine that its path toward NATO membership is irreversible during the alliance's summit that has begun in Washington. Of course, the words mean very little if you remember what they told Russia about the expansion of NATO. James Baker, what a classy dude he was. The report from Politico said the language is already included in a draft version of the communique that's set to be released on Wednesday. The text will be finalized on Tuesday night, but it has already been approved by the U.S. and other major NATO countries. The Politico report said the inclusion of the language would be a, quote, stunning development for Ukraine and, quote, a major defeat for Russia, end quote. But there's no sign that Ukraine will be given a clear roadmap toward membership at the summit, meaning the communique will be another empty promise designed to continue the proxy war. Well stated, Dave. The issue of Ukraine's potential NATO membership was a major motive for Russian President Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. During the lead up to the invasion, the U.S. refused to engage seriously with Russia's demand for the U.S. to give a guarantee that Ukraine wouldn't be admitted into NATO, despite telling Kiev behind the scenes that there would be no membership for at least a decade. Ukraine was first promised it would eventually become a NATO member at a 2008 summit in Bucharest, despite the issue being a major red line for Russia. At the time, then U.S. Ambassador to Russia, William Burns, yes, Simpson, yes, the current CIA director, warned against promising NATO membership to Ukraine and Georgia. He said the vow touches a raw nerve in Russia and raises serious security concerns for Moscow. In a cable published by WikiLeaks, Burns wrote, quote, not only does Russia perceive encirclement and efforts to undermine Russia's influence in the region, but it also fears unpredictable and uncontrollable consequences which would seriously affect Russian security interests because, of course, their perception was a correct perception because it was really happening. Jeez. Since the Russian invasion, writes Dave, Ukrainian President Zelensky has been looking for a clear path to NATO membership and stronger commitments. He was furious at last year's NATO summit in Vilnius when the alliance issued a vague communique that said it, quote, will be in a position to extend an invitation to Ukraine to join the alliance when allies agree and conditions are met. Nice rhythm there, huh? A Ukrainian official who spoke with Politico about this year's NATO summit said other NATO members want stronger language than the U.S. Quote, we've had sort of an agreement with the United States, so it will be really clear that the path to membership is irreversible, but other allies are really pushing for a stronger wording. So they have here Great Britain, France, our Baltic friends, all want to make sure that the wording in the declaration is stronger than what the U.S. has pushed and leaves no room for doubt. Well, maybe they can just do it the way that they do it at the State Department or the White House when people ask questions about, hey, you keep giving these weapons to Israel and they keep slaughtering innocent people. Yeah, you're going to stop doing that? Well, we have expectations. Hey, remember like 2 months ago when we asked you like, hey, you think maybe you might stop sending the weapons over because they keep using the weapons to kill innocent people? Now even more people are dead. People are starving to death. Kids have skin diseases, that sort of stuff. They bombed hospitals, schools that the UN was using for refuge for people. Hey, you think you might stop sending the weapons? We've got expectations. I think I know what your expectations are. Starts with a G. It's called genocide. Well, anyway, and I don't think you're going to stop. And guess what? Netanyahu's on his way. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. So you can celebrate Bastille Day, get all psyched up for that coming in 4 days, and get ready for Netanyahu's visit. It's going to be just wonderful. It's awesome. And some people down in Washington, D.C., who suck off your money, your earnings, and want to control your lives even more, well, guess what? They are superficially protesting. Yeah, it's true, including Nancy Pelosi and the lovely, greatest of all American Indians, Elizabeth Warren. Here it is, everybody. Elizabeth Warren to boycott Netanyahu's speech to Congress. This, of course, came on the 19th of June, and it says from the Hill, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, will not attend a speech by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, expected to be delivered next month, to a joint meeting of Congress. And you get to pay for that. It's going to be awesome. Wonder what hotel they'll put him up in. That'll be great. Yeah, maybe they can, house him with some of the NYC migrant housing things going on, or put him in a hotel next to Gillette Stadium, give him free food, medical care. Oh, he already gets that from the U.S. Sorry. We'll continue. Benjamin Netanyahu has created a humanitarian disaster, Warren said. You think maybe she might be culpable in that? Let's look at her background a little bit and find out. The United States needs to be using its leverage, she says, including restrictions on arms sales, as a way to advance a push toward peace in the Middle East. She said when asked for her reaction to the Biden administration's pursuit of a military sale to Israel, quote, we need a ceasefire, massive humanitarian relief, the return of the hostages, and we've got to have a breakthrough on getting the parties to the negotiating table. Giving more arms to Israel is not pushing in the right direction. Well, guess what? If you do a little research, you find that she's always had one leg on either side of the fulcrum of the seesaw. That's Liz Warren. She loves to ride the middle. And she loves to speak out of both sides of her mouth, or at least speak a good game and then vote a different way. So let's go back to 2019, October of 2019. Here's a little something to take with you from the Intellectual Armament Division. Here it is. This comes to us from Jewish Telegraph Agency. Washington, Dateline Washington, JTA. When it comes to pressuring Israel, Elizabeth Warren doesn't have a specific plan. Oh, by Jove. The senator from Massachusetts, who has caught up in polling with frontrunners for the Democrat presidential nomination, now faces intensified scrutiny as a newly viable contender. And what has emerged is that Warren is vague about how she would pressure Israel if she perceives it to be acting contrary to U.S. interests. So what has her game been since at least 2019? Not to say, hey, there's a U.S. Constitution. I swore to uphold it. It doesn't allow us to send weapons to Israel. No, to use those as leverage to say, well, we're going to give you some arms, but we could give you more arms. We're going to restrict this amount of arms. You're still going to get a certain amount of arms so you can kill people. Not a lot more than that, because we want you to be able to agree not to kill people, and then we'll give you more arms. Brilliant, huh? That's awesome. Totally contrary to her oath, but who cares about that, right? I mean, hey, she's willing to completely draw up a farcical life as an American Indian for years so she can get into plum positions at universities and put herself into the books as a lawyer, as a minority lawyer. Okay. Sure thing there, Liz. How about I'm going to get myself a beer? Remember that when she was doing her live stream with her so loving husband? That was great. She was running for president. I'm just like you. I'm going to get myself a beer. Ow. Oh, what are these in the refrigerator, honey? They must be beers. Oh, this is so much fun. Unbelievable. So it says, of course, in 2019, the senator from Massachusetts, who has caught up in polling, so on and so forth. So she says, we must find ways to make tangible progress on the ground toward a two-state solution, she said in the video. So that was 2019. Guess what she's done every year since then? She supported the budget, which always includes $3.8 billion in military aid to Israel, and she supported the National Defense Authorization Act, which, of course, sometimes has supplemental aid. For you got it. You know. For, of course, France. No, I'm sorry. Israel. Because she wants to find some way to get an answer. And the best way to do it is just keep doing what you're doing. Keep giving them weapons to kill people and hold people in that giant 25-by-5 corral called Gaza. It'll work. It's just an awesome way to operate. Totally honest, totally goes with your oath. And of course, it's really good for the people in Gaza. I'm sure it's just been wonderful. So she was in Iowa, and she says, last week, Warren was pressed on this question by a reporter. Everything is on the table, she said, but would not elaborate. The question matters, as a willingness to leverage aid to shift Israel's policy is emerging as a litmus test for Democrats. Yeah, she says sometimes what might happen is finding ways to apply pressure and create consequences for problematic behavior, as previous Democrat and Republican presidents have done, she said. For example, if Israel's government continues with steps to formally annex the West Bank, the United States should make it clear that none of our aid should be used to support annexation. What's the key there? They're still giving them aid. Oh, well, yeah, we're going to make sure we have expectations. What a joke. Just ridiculous. It's so stupid. It's crazy. Oh, man. There's the fatuousness of these people is just beyond compare. It just blows my mind, And don't forget, yesterday we reported that Facebook is now going to censor people who come out talking about Zionism. They're going to say that that's anti-Semitic. We'll talk about censorship coming up a little bit more in just a minute. But first, let's go to Dave DeCamp and his reporting for, of course, antiwar.com, because he has some great information to give us about this 26% of Gaza that is now controlled by the IDF. Now, The print version of this is over there. Okay, you can see Israeli military controls 26% of Gaza. There's that story, right? But Dave, in his video, which is, again, if you sign up at YouTube, I don't know how much they're censored. I don't know if they've got a Rumble channel. If they had a Rumble channel, I would greatly prefer that. But so far, so good. I haven't seen that they've been shot down too much. And hopefully he's going to get lots more subscribers. But he's always doing it. It's just amazing work from Dave. And starting Monday morning at about midnight, Sunday night into Monday morning, the first report goes out, and Thursday night into Friday morning, the last one goes out. And then over the weekend, he's writing articles like I am. He's just a really, really terrific reporter for peace. So here is what he has to say, because he amplifies on some of the things as he reads. He mentions things that he knows. It's very conversational. And I think some of these additional items that he brings up are very worthwhile.
Today, the Israeli military controls 26% of Gaza. So Haaretz reported on Monday that the Israeli military has taken control of 26% of the Gaza Strip and is building bases and paving roads in the areas that it controls to ensure long-term occupation, which could lead to Jewish settlements. So we're not talking about, when we say that they control these areas, it's not just that the military is there. They've also completely demolished everything that was there for the most part, destroyed the agricultural land, and started building military bases. And Israel established what it calls a buffer zone along the entire Israel-Gaza border by demolishing buildings in that area. And that zone cuts about 1 kilometer into Gaza along the entire border. And this is something I've covered before. I think it's really important because, again, this shows how Israel is currently, taking parts of Gaza. And that buffer zone accounts for about 16% of Gaza's territory. They've also taken control of the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border of Gaza and Egypt. And they have also created what they call the Netzarim corridor, which is a pretty wide area. It's 38 square kilometers. And that separates northern Gaza from the rest of the Strip. And if you see this Haaretz report that they published, it's one of these interactive things where you could scroll down and see all sorts of pictures. And they have the overhead shot of these areas that Israel has taken control of. And then they show the satellite images of this Netzarim corridor before October 7th and what it looks like today. And, you see plenty of buildings, green, lush, what looks like agricultural land. And then if you scroll down to what it looks like now, it's just a complete wasteland. So the before and after is just really almost shocking to look at. I mean, it's just the whole land, it's just destroyed. And there's just a few buildings that they left standing, including the Turkish hospital, which is a military base now. So the Turkish hospital is the only cancer treatment hospital in Gaza. And the Israeli military now uses it as a base. So there's some history here. There was an Israeli settlement called Netzarim that used to be located where the Turkish hospital was built. And all Israeli settlements in Gaza were evacuated by 2005 as part of this policy known as the disengagement. But the Netzarim settlement, the way that Haaretz actually described it, they said that this particular settlement, the Netzarim settlement, was part of an Israeli government plan to bisect Gaza and strengthen Israeli control by means of civilian settlements. And again, we're talking before 2005. Today, Israeli soldiers in Gaza are taking symbolic steps to show their support for reestablishing Jewish settlements in the territory. And they're posting these videos and sharing them on social media. And one of these videos, there's a few examples in the report. One shows a uniformed Israeli soldier placing a large menorah, in a building near the Turkish hospital. So in this same place where this Jewish settlement once was. And this menorah was said to be the same one that was removed from a synagogue that was in the Netzarim settlement before it was evacuated. So, and there's other things about Israeli soldiers, again, putting out, calling for, settlements and things like that. So this Netzarim corridor is also where the U.S. pier was built. And there is graffiti written in Hebrew near this pier that says, "Without settlement, there's no victory." So Netanyahu has denied that establishing Jewish settlements in Gaza was one of his goals, but members of his coalition government and his Likud party openly support this idea, as well as the expulsion of Palestinians, and they're not shy about it. I put in a quote here from Shlomo Karhi, who is the communications minister and a member of the Likud party. This was at a pro-settlement march in May. He said, quote, "In order to preserve the security achievements that our soldiers lost their lives for, we must resettle Gaza with security forces and settlers that will embrace the land with love," end quote. So Ben-Gvir was at the same march and called for the expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza. And even though, we know that this is something that the Israeli government, ultimately wants to do, whether or not Netanyahu publicly says it. There's been reports that he has said, he was looking at trying to find countries that will absorb Palestinians from Gaza, as was how he put it. And back in October 2023, one of the first big leaks that came out was a document prepared by Israel's intelligence ministry that was leaked to the media. It said that the best post-war scenario for Israel would be the expulsion of all 2.3 million Palestinians living in Gaza, all of them. That plan said send them to Egypt. Egypt hasn't let them in, isn't going for that. So, I think they're probably trying to think of other plans. But for now, what they're doing is kind of, taking over this territory. And, I'd be surprised if they give it back anytime soon. So, and
well stated. Oh, one last bit.
This is another thing when we get to the U.S. always says, "Oh, we don't support any post-war plan that involves, Gaza's territory shrinking." Well, Gaza's territory has already shrunk. Again, they're not just occupying these areas; they didn't just take control; they've just completely leveled everything there.
Well, we have expectations, those crazy expectations. So we just expect more of the same, I think, won't we? Yeah, that's for darn sure. So a couple other items that I want to mention to you. I mentioned the Facebook censorship and criticizing the government of Israel will now be considered anti-Semitism. There is something that you might have seen around just a little bit, and we had it on the billboard for the show tonight. This thing called GARMS, GARMS. GARM, the group that is supposedly behind speech safety guideposts. Okay. Now, Facebook's involved with this, YouTube, Google is involved with this, and major product corporations are involved with this, including Procter & Gamble. And part of the reason it's in the news is because today, the judiciary, otherwise known as the Judiciary Committee, chaired by Jim Jordan, released a report, and it's called GARM's Harm: How the World's Biggest Brands Seek to Control Online Speech. It is an interim report of the Committee of the Judiciary, U.S. House of Representatives, as they call it. So I'm going to give you a bit of the introduction here, because if this sounds familiar, if this sounds sort of like NewsGuard, sort of like a combination of corporate power and government power, otherwise known as fascism. If this sounds anything like the C2PA thing that they have, that Sony's involved with and Microsoft's involved with, the Coalition for Content Provenance, right? If it sounds any like those things, or it sounds like the Australian government patting itself on the back for helping Julian Assange, which was good, but at the same time continuing to be interested in silencing Twitter and X and so on. It's very interesting, because you would be right. This is very similar to a massive fascist dump. And at first it looks like it's just corporate interests, that they're just concerned. That's all. That's all. They're just concerned about the truth online. You see, that's all. But it's more than that, because when you start to look at the people who are part of this thing called the World Federation of Advertisers, you find out some of their very, very strong connections. And I'm only discovering a little bit of this today, but already this stuff is popping up. So let's discover it together. Check this out. Here's what Jim Jordan's committee's executive summary says, just out today. The Committee on the Judiciary, as they say on the Metro, if you're on the Metro and they have a person driving in and it's not a recording, Judiciary Station, Judiciary. The Committee on the Judiciary has jurisdiction over the protection of trade and commerce against unlawful restraints and monopolies. Really? That's interesting. And in exercising, which they shouldn't, unlawful restraints and monopolies. They're the ones who have the monopoly, and they're the ones who use the so-called antitrust division to go after people and destroy businesses. In exercising oversight of the adequacy and sufficiency of existing U.S. antitrust laws, the committee has been investigating apparent collusion within the World Federation of Advertisers, the WFA, and specifically its Global Alliance for Responsible Media. You ever heard of these guys? I didn't know about them till today. Through GARM, large corporations, advertising agencies, and industry associations, in other words, revolving door with politicians, and connections to deep state for businesses that work and depend on the deep state. Pharmacies, pharmaceutical companies, communications companies, weapons contractors, so on and so forth. Energy companies like Shell. The industry associations participated in boycotts and other coordinated action to demonetize platforms, podcasts, news outlets, and other content deemed disfavored by GARM and its members. Sound a little bit like NewsGuard? You're right. NewsGuard takes it unto itself to be a news monitor. Of course, it gets subsidized by the federal government. Awesome. And then they come after us at MRC TV. So I still have that invitation for anybody at NewsGuard to debate me if they want to, but we haven't heard back from them yet. Still haven't heard back from them. So that's interesting. But GARM seems to operate in the same way. These large corporations, as Jim Jordan's committee says, large corporations, advertising agencies, and industry associations participated in boycotts and other coordinated action to demonetize platforms, podcasts, news outlets, and other content deemed disfavored by GARM and its members. So think David Knight, think others who might not even know. And maybe they'll discover this. Maybe some of this information will come out further. Maybe people like Matt Taibbi and others, Michael Schellenberger, will start digging into this as well. You know, I did a lot of work on NewsGuard and the Portman-Murphy Countering Foreign Propaganda Act, starting really when it was proposed. I was covering it, trying to tell people don't allow this to get passed, but it was in the NDAA that year, and Obama signed it in December of 2016. So this is the World Federation of Advertisers. Created by WFA in 2019, GARM quickly amassed tremendous market power in the advertising industry. Among other data points, one, World Federation of Advertisers members represent roughly 90% of global advertising spending, or almost $1 trillion annually. Two, GARM includes every major advertising agency holding company in its ranks and includes the world's largest media buying agency, Group M, on its steering team. And they have an endnote or footnote. GARM's steering team, or they call it steer team, which acts as a board of directors and is also closely involved in GARM's day-to-day operations, includes 4 large corporations: Unilever, soaps, drugs; Mars, candy bars, that sort of thing, sweets, stuff like that; Diageo, I don't know them; and Procter & Gamble, which has a vast, wide array of all sorts of stuff, from detergent to razors to all sorts of things. that spend billions annually on advertising. GARM reports to the WFA Executive Committee, which must endorse GARM's work and includes representatives from AB InBev, L'Oreal, Nestle, IBM, as well as many more large corporations connected with government forces and climate change interests and household name brands. GARM calls itself, quote, an industry-first effort that unites marketers, media agencies, media platforms, industry associations, and advertising technology solutions providers to safeguard the potential of digital media by reducing the availability and monetization of, you got it, my friends, harmful content online. Yeah. GARM claims, writes the Judiciary Committee, GARM claims that it was created to drive transparency in policies to help companies achieve brand safety. Oh, that's just, my British friends are going to love hearing that one because they've always been very anti-corporate. Brand safety. That's a good one, huh? Or in other words, transparency on where ads are placed to make sure that advertisers don't inadvertently support certain content on social media platforms. Can you say DEI and ESG? To achieve this goal, GARM asserts that it works in the content monetization space, defined as, quote, what content ads actually support, what content ads actually support, and the practice of insertion of the ads online. So they're worried that the ads might support certain content that they don't like, and then where are those ads going to go? Got to be careful about that. GARM disclaims involvement in content moderation. Well, of course, they'll just say, we're not going to allow our ads to go there. We're not moderating your content. You're moderating the content. You are the people that are moderating the content. We're just telling you whether we're going to give you any money to advertise these things. And it should be their choice, shouldn't it? Right? Unless, of course, you think about corporations. The fact that in the United States Constitution, there's nothing that allows the federal government to create corporations in the first place. The fact that corporate status immunizes the actual people who form the corporation so that their personal assets are not, in danger if their corporation does something wrong. People can't collect from the actual individuals who started the corporation when they bring a tortious claim. That's interesting because the government gets in the way and gives them corporate status. It's a magic show. It's great. And they don't allow that in their government courts. See, it's just great. And you got to pay for it. There's no justice in the halls of justice because you're paying for it all. And then, of course, you get this idea that GARM will somehow not work with government to get these particular things promoted and to promote government lines because, of course, there's that feedback loop where, well, you got to play good with the government policies here, right? So you see everybody adopting DEI and all the LGBTQ stuff. Burger King saying, hey, you want to throw some milkshakes at, a conservative guy, a guy who's, Brexit, in favor of Brexit. Yeah, we know what you mean by milkshakes, which is quick hardening plaster inside plastic cups. But you can also come over here. We're totally in favor of people throwing milkshakes. Yeah, that's classy, isn't it? No wonder Burger King's doing so bad. Then they have, as they say, GARM admits, however, that content monetization and moderation are inextricably linked, and lapses in moderation put advertising and advertisers at risk. Yeah, so again, it should be up to them, right? And yet we know that they're connected to government very clearly. In other words, GARM's monetization work has the effect of influencing what content appears online. And again, that should be totally fine. If people want to do that, you have conservative groups say, hey, you know, this is a bad movie. Movie reviewers don't go to the movie. Should be a similar thing. Don't give them your money, right? Absolutely. Don't forget, you know, I mentioned this to David Knight. Byron Allen, who heads up, I think it was Black Entertainment Television. He was a stand-up comic. He was on that show Real People, I think, on network television back in was it early 80s or something. He's done very, very well. Multiple entertainment franchises, Black Entertainment Television, I think BET. And he was suing McDonald's because he was saying they weren't advertising enough on his network. They weren't giving him enough business. And that was a discrimination, right? So again, it comes down all over the place here. And the thing about it is that when you've got corporate status, obviously you're going to start playing favorites with government or utilizing certain sentiment to make it look like you're the knight in shining armor coming to the emotional rescue. The problem is, of course, the power of the state to give these people such power and the power of the state to regulate things. And I don't think they're going to get any improvement coming from Jim Jordan's committee because they're just going to make it worse. They're going to use what? Antitrust? That's ridiculous. The government is going to take my money to fund something that I didn't choose. Antitrust? No, thank you. But they make some points here. For an organization reliant on speech and persuasion in advertising, GARM appears to have anti-democratic views of fundamental American freedoms. In discussing his views on freedom of speech, GARM's leader and co-founder, Rob Rakowitz, has expressed frustration with, quote, an extreme global interpretation of the U.S. Constitution and complained about using principles of governance and applying them as literal law from 230 years ago, made by white men exclusively. And that's a quote. With this worldview, GARM pushed what it called uncommon collaboration to, quote, rise above individual commercial interest. Section 1 of the Sherman Antitrust Act makes unreasonable restraints of trade illegal. Included in these illegal restraints, so that would be government. Government itself would be illegal because it has restraints. Oh, but I'm sorry. It's the government that determines what's reasonable and unreasonable, right? Man, that's great. Included in these illegal restraints are certain group boycotts and coordinated actions that harm consumers. Documents produced to the committee suggest that GARM may have engaged in coordinated conduct that violates Section 1. But again, this is extremely important. This is where they go off the rails. Because let's say a bunch of people wanted to boycott Israel, right? A bunch of companies, maybe they were pro-Christian, pro-peace or whatever. And, you know, we got Ben & Jerry's is combining with a couple others. They could get attacked in the same way as these GARM people are getting attacked. The question is, how close are these people to the state, which has no competition? All right. So now let's go over to a little research. Inside Radio, the most trusted news in radio. And this came out July 3rd. GARM, the group behind brand safety guideposts, is under scrutiny in Washington. So they were ahead of the game here. The Global Alliance for Responsible Media, the organization whose framework is used to decide how safe or appropriate podcast content is for marketers, is under fire in Washington for an alleged anti-conservative bias. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, is planning to hold a hearing exploring potential federal antitrust law violations. Again, there's nothing in the Constitution that can be interpreted as allowing antitrust. They use a misreading of the Interstate Commerce Clause to say, well, if you're doing business that goes over state borders, then we can tell you to shut down, or that you're too big, or that you bought out the wrong company, or you're working with the wrong company, you have the wrong agreement with that company, you're not advertising enough over here, you're advertising too much over there, you're not allowing this on your platform, you're allowing this on your platform. It's not up to them. They're not the ones risking their own assets. And of course, they shouldn't be granting in the federal government the corporate status to protect corporate people, so-called, as Mitt Romney might say, to protect people who form corporations from being liable if their corporations do bad things. It's their stinking business. They should be liable. Jordan first subpoenaed top officials from GARM and its parent, the World Federation of Advertisers, WFA, in March of 2023 for documents and communications related to their coordinated efforts to demonetize and censor disfavored speech online. He said the organizations appeared to be colluding to prevent certain content from benefiting from advertiser dollars and reduce that content's presence online. Again, they should be able to collude, but not as corporations. What if you discover that behind the scenes, these advertisers were colluding? They never made it public. They claimed that they just advertised on the best advertising spaces that they could find, but then you found out they'd been working with each other, and then you try to sue for harm. Well, guess what? The people who made the decisions in the collusion process, their assets would be safe. The corporate assets would be at risk. And again, have fun trying to take on a corporation as an individual, unless you can get into a class action suit with like a million other people, right? Oh, man. Jordan first subpoenaed them in March of 2023, and he wrote in the letters, quote, GARM works with its members to demonetize and eliminate disfavored content online. He said it appears the group created categories such as debated sensitive social issues. Well, that should be fine if people don't want to get into sensitive social issues, to restrict advertising. This collusive conduct, well, that's different. You know, usually collusive conduct is something that is an attack. You're colluding to attack, right? He's got a sinister insinuation here. Well, I think it is sinister. But in this case, if it's just you don't want to advertise on sensitive social issues, you'll be able to talk to anybody you want to and say, hey, are you going to advertise with these guys? Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, me neither. Yeah, that's not cool, right? And if they're going to restrict this, again, what if people have something that happens to favor, I don't know, pro-life? And there are a bunch of pro-life organizations that want to get together and boycott something. Can they do that? Can they actually talk to each other, or is that collusion? Jordan has now reportedly asked executives from the two companies that are part of GARM to testify during a July 10th hearing titled Collusion in the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, Breitbart News reports. And they report executives from Group M and Unilever have been invited to testify about how their companies use GARM data to decide where advertising is placed. Breitbart says Jordan says both companies are, quote, closely involved in GARM's efforts to boycott, demonetize, and censor disfavored viewpoints. Now, I will hand it to people like Jim Jordan. He has said that the United States government has got to stop funding NewsGuard. Whether or not that happens in the long term, I highly doubt it, right? But this is too much at first blush. Again, GARM was launched at Cannes, because that's all just like the film people get together in Cannes, right? Former Cannes member. Just like they get together in Cannes for movies, they get together for advertisers too, because, you know, a lot of people work in making commercials and ad campaigns and stuff, and they move back and forth between the ad agencies and the film industry, directing, writing, copywriting, and representatives of stars and creative talent and all that stuff. They're all mixed together, right? So that's one advantage of my Hollywood stuff, is I know how that stuff goes, right? So like I've walked in the halls of CAA and stuff like that. Like I know how it goes. But there's more. There is a bit more. They were launched in the summer of 2019, and the organization says it has been working to highlight the changes needed for advertisers to feel more confident about advertising. It has done that by creating brand safety standards in advertising, by establishing common definitions, metrics, and tools to help brands steer their ads away from content they think is not in line with their values. Welcome AI from these guys anytime soon. That'll be wonderful. They probably already have it going. And many conservatives have said those standards have been weaponized to redirect advertising away from right-leaning content. Okay. In March, but can you demand that they advertise with you? Of course you can't. Unless they're getting government support or they're tied to the government in some ways, right? That's the key. If this is just a free market, people should be free in the market to decide. I don't want to advertise with you. No, thank you. In March, Jordan sent letters to the CEOs of Diageo, Group M, Mars Incorporated, they've got a comma between there, and Procter & Gamble and Unilever, all members of the GARM steer team, requesting documents and communications. He said the evidence obtained by the Judiciary Committee suggests that GARM members, led by steer team members, are colluding to demonize conservative platforms and voices. This coordination does not always revolve around brand safety and harmful content, as GARM publicly claims, Jordan said, but instead the desire to censor conservative and other views that GARM members disfavor. Well, what if they think they're harmful? Can't they be free to think they're harmful? Again, this is the problem when you get government involved with trying to regulate speech. It's impossible. There's such a wide spectrum of opinions on speech in the first place. It's like Dennis Moore's redistribution of wealth, except this is looking at it through the speech lens. However, I did a little more digging. So here's a little more. If you go to the World Federation of Advertisers website, you'll see this. Global Alliance for Responsible Media launches to address digital safety, the 18th of June, 2019. That's about the same time that Liz Warren was on that seesaw about Israel. 17 of the world's leading advertisers announced the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, an unprecedented global collaboration with agencies, those are ad agencies, media companies, production companies, and of course, putting the material out, right? And platforms directly putting the material out. And industry associations to rapidly improve digital safety. With nearly 3.8 billion, not dollars going to Israel, no, with nearly 3.8 billion people online, the world is increasingly connected. And yet the increases in dangerous, hateful, disruptive, and fake content online risk threatening our global community. Well, clearly somebody would say, how do you know? Thanks for being the arbiter. And then they could say, screw you, I'm not going to buy your products, right? I'm going to go elsewhere. The question is whether people's tax money are being used to help favor some of these corporations. That's the key. That's what, the Sherman Antitrust Act doesn't bother looking at. Of course they won't. Members of the Global Alliance for Responsible Media recognize the role that advertisers can play in collectively pushing to improve the safety of online environments. So, here we go with some background information. The Alliance was founded by World Federation of Advertisers members and will also be championed by the ANA CMO Growth Council, a member organization of the WFA. Now, there's further investigation I have to do to find out the members of the ANA CMO Growth Council, get those names going back to 2019 if I can. But I've got a little bit of information that hints at some, I think, stuff that you might have expected. Advertisers including Adidas. Oh, what's this? Bayer. Yeah. Highly connected with government. Bayer, of course, they just bought out Monsanto. BP, British Petroleum. You know their history. Highly connected with not just the British government and parliament and the old colonial system as it died off in England, but the royal family itself. Danone, don't know them. Diageo, General Mills, and, what's this? GlaxoSmithKline, consumer health care. Oh, no connection to government in any friggin' way whatsoever. I think we get it. It didn't take long to do that investigation today. Evidently, Jim Jordan's committee didn't do that investigation. I found it pretty quickly. I don't know why these people aren't bringing up the government connections. It's almost as if they want to persist with the naive fakeness that the idea of the Sherman Antitrust Act is appropriate because it's their lever of power. And they can use it, or it's a hammer. They can use it against people, but they don't want people to know the government connections with GlaxoSmithKline, Bayer, BP, and others. Oh, there's more. We mentioned Nestle. Let's get a little more. MasterCard. Oh, MasterCard. They're not connected to the Federal Reserve and the banking system in any way whatsoever, and they're not highly regulated by the federal government with an open door going back and forth to MasterCard. It's not corrupt in any way. It's not part of the giant deep state top-down umbrella. And, of course, the umbrella opens and all the stuff that's being held in it comes down on you while they're protected afterwards. Then we've got a little bit more. Vodafone, Shell. Gee, what a shocker. Then we have experts at Dentsu, Group M, IPG, Publicis Media, and Omnicom Media Group, representing media agencies. Media companies and platforms at the launch included, you got it, Facebook, Google, something called Teads, TrustX, Twitter, before you know who bought it, Unruly, and yes, Verizon Media, formerly what? You got it, AT&T. AT&T given a monopoly in World War I to control the phone lines, then broken up in the 80s into 9X and Pac-Bell and all these different things, then reformed, and they became Verizon. Then we've got this. Supporting Industry Associations, ANA, 4As, Interactive Advertising Bureau, ISBA, Mobile Marketing Association, Coalition for Better Ads, FE Worldwide, and WFA alongside their local advertising association members. And you can bet that if somebody's scraping data to look for these things, I just now shot down the ability for this particular show to get out there or to get advertising. You can bet this thing's going to be shadow banned big time, right? NBC. Oh, and did I mention NBC Universal is in there as well? Yeah, NBC Universal. Don't forget, again, federal government, NBC exists because the Federal Radio Commission was started in the 1920s unconstitutionally with a bogus claim that radio waves go over state borders, so the federal government can control them, claim to own them, and then rent them out. And the federal government will create two networks, the red network and the blue network. I know, weird, isn't it? And then it split off one of them, and within a few years, they had ABC, NBC, and CBS. They delayed television into the 1940s. That's when they turned the FRC into the FCC. The Federal Radio Commission became the Federal Communications Commission, and television started. But it could have started 4 or 5 years before it started. But the people who had the radio licenses didn't want the television licenses. And again, license is a loaded word. Nobody should have to be licensed to try to use a radio wave to propagate a signal to people. That's just ridiculous. So the government issues these licenses, and they delayed issuing licenses for television because the owners of the radio stations didn't want the competition. It took a while because then the owners of the radio stations had to get into positions where they could start their own television stations, and then they issued. You got it. It's like WBZ. WBZ radio started 50,000 watts. And what was one of the first television stations to start in New England? WBZ, Westinghouse Broadcasting. There you go. It's awesome. Hey, it's a good station. I'm not knocking WBZ. But heck, Joyce Kulhawick, entertainment reporter on WBZ News for years. She was covering volcanoes, suns, and the cars, and human sexual response, and all sorts of good stuff. Mission of Burma, so she was on top of it. So anyway, figured I'd give you that little bit of info. And before we go, everybody, I want to give you this little bit of info, talking about music. Again, don't forget, everybody, we'll look into this more, but it's GARM, the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, launches to address digital safety back in 2019. Hopefully that was some valuable research for you. Now let's get into a little history. Check out this segment if you have kids. They might enjoy this, hopefully, and find it interesting. Maybe adults interested in history. Here's a little something about the welfare state. And for this, let's go punk rock. Let's go Black Flag.
Gimme, gimme, gimme! I need some more! Gimme, gimme, gimme! Don't ask what for! 1, 2, 3, 4! Stand here like a loaded gun, waiting to go off! I've got nothing to do but shoot my mouth off! Gimme, gimme, gimme!
Yeah, give me some more.
Give me some more! Gimme, gimme, gimme! Don't ask what for!
Yeah, all right. I love Black Flag. I love Black Flag. Good band. And yeah, I remember the first time I heard Black Flag, I'm like, wow, these guys are really intense. And yes, they are. So, promise I give you some of this information, and I think you might dig this. This comes from the Mises Institute. It was released on the 8th. It didn't begin with LBJ. How the U.S. became a transfer society. This is by Edouard Boucher. And this is actually a review of a new book. And you know how I have that book called The Not So Wild Wild West? I actually have it over here. I would pick it up, but a bunch of stuff would fall down. Terry Anderson, Peter Hill, great writers doing a lot of work together for years. Well, this is a review by Edouard Boucher of their new book, actually. And the new book is called The Birth of the Transfer Society. So, in fact, let me just show you real quick here so you can see it. Oh, actually, no, I can't even show it. It's not popping up, so that's okay. That's all right. Oh, and the book, actually, it's a little bit older than this, so we're going to go into this. Their book traces the decline of the American constitutional framework from its origins in laissez-faire individualism to its current state of redistributive collectivism. Now, there have been a few other books that have done this. I've mentioned Marvin Olasky's The Tragedy of American Compassion. David Beato has from free association to welfare state. I think that's what it is, or from charity to welfare state. I'm hacking that one up. But they have this fascinating account. And again, the name of the book, let me just see if I can click this up here. Yeah, okay, here we go. The Birth of a Transfer Society. There it is. You can find that over at Amazon. Yeah, it's older, 1989. So this is quite interesting because it really starts to show us the roots of a lot of this. And of course, the mindset has been there, going back millennia, to the idea of keeping certain groups coddled, publicly favoring certain groups, getting political feedback from these groups, especially if you have so-called democracy, preying off people, that sort of thing. So Anderson and Hill, they trace the decline of American constitutional framework from its origins in laissez-faire individualism to its current state of redistributive collectivism. Viewing the evolution as a series of legal developments motivated by ever greater financial incentives to involve the federal government, they highlight the following pivotal cases. 1, Marbury versus Madison in 1803, which established the Supreme Court's right to so-called, or prerogative, the claim of power, to perform so-called judicial review, striking down laws that it considered unconstitutional. Well, they all swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, right? So then there's McCulloch v. Maryland in 1819, which sanctioned Congress's founding of the Bank of the United States, utterly unconstitutional, and deemed that states could not tax instruments of the federal government, and further solidified the basis for judicial review, right? So why couldn't states tax stuff from the federal government, right? Then there's Ogden v. Saunders in 1827, which ended the old laissez-faire interpretation of, you got it, the contract clause, which is, of course, that states cannot interfere with pre-existing contracts. Then number 4 is a case called Munn v. Illinois, 1877, which for the first time granted the state the power to control private property via the public interest argument. And 5th, U.S. v. Grimaud, 1911, which gave administrative rulings the force of law. beginning the transfer of the lawmaking function from Congress to the president. So this is very interesting because it really is a nice mental ideological follow-up to the decision that overturned the Chevron standard last week in those two fishing cases from the Supreme Court. Now, it didn't go far enough, in my view, to strike down the regulatory agencies, but it did strike down the idea that the regulatory agencies themselves, whether they be the EPA, the FDA, the ATF, whatever they might be, OSHA, that they can just unilaterally expand their powers in so-called ambiguous areas where they can fill in the blanks. And that anybody who has a problem with that can only then turn to that so-called regulatory agency. That's what they struck down before. They said from now on, it's going to have to come to the courts. So it's a slight improvement, and it might put a delay on some of these things. But again, we can go back to 1911, the case of U.S. v. Grimaud, 1911, Grimaud, and then there's Grimaud, which gave administrative rulings the force of law and began the transfer of the lawmaking function from Congress to the president, the executive branch. Emphasizing the role played by the courts, the authors show how from 1877 to 1917, the Constitution was altered in numerous ways, again, including the Sherman Antitrust Act, that made transfers much easier to obtain, transfers of power. Except for the income tax amendment, all of these changes came through interpretation by the courts. Furthermore, the, quote, substitution of an equivocal concept like so-called public interest to form constitutional so-called limitations meant that the subjective judgment of justices was supreme, or in this case, the so-called regulation agencies. Writes the author, this set the stage for private interests to learn to benefit from governmental transfers. You start seeing more and more rent seeking. You can get your political favorites in office. You get the court on your side. You're all set. Quote, there is no field in which industry experts, there is no field in which industry expects or gets more from its associations than that of relations with government bodies. This becomes true year by year as government, and particularly the federal government, plays an ever-increasing part in our business and industrial life. So hopefully putting this in after that GARM thing was an appropriate thing for me to plan out today. I hope this is a good piece of information for you. Unlike mainstream economists, the authors identify governmentally enforced transfers as negative sum instead of as zero sum. And that's absolutely right, because the government can only operate by taking opportunities from people, and then it further takes opportunities from people with its decisions. Their reasoning, while cogent, can, however, be enhanced in its rigor by including insights from the Austrian school. Consider the following, quote, when property rights are transferred without some quid pro quo, a non-voluntary transfer takes place. In other words, if both parties don't agree, if it's not voluntary, right? The most obvious example of such transfer activity is theft. At first glance, such activity might appear to be zero sum since one person's gain is another person's loss, but this ignores the process through which the transfer is effected, and of course it ignores the opportunity costs. The result of this transfer activity is negative sum, since nothing is produced and resources are expended in the process. And that's very interesting on the thief side. The reader is reminded of our unwillingness to allow interpersonal utility comparisons. That's a very good point. A thief invests in physical and human capital to effect a transfer only if it nets a normal rate of return. However, an owner invests in additional measures to increase the probability of capturing the return of his assets. And again, the higher the crime rate, the more a person has to spend on trying to stop the crime. Right? That was one of the arguments that Thomas Hobbes made for, well, we need to have just a completely powerful central government, because people are wasting money on their locks on their doors, and they're going out with weapons and so on and so forth. And this state of nature, we need to have an all-powerful king. The state of nature, people just don't trust each other. They lock their doors, they carry weapons. So you need to have an all-powerful king over everything. Well, he wasn't describing the state of nature. The example he gave was from royal medieval Europe. They had kings. I said to the students, like, anybody notice the temporal context here is a bit of a problem for him that he seems to overlook? They're like, yeah, they already have kings. I'm like, yeah. And he's claiming that's an example of no state. They're like, they already don't trust each other, and you've got a king. So what's your answer? More powerful king, of course. Oh, okay, Thomas. Thanks very much. I'm just going to watch Lucille Ball now. Thank you. Moreover, an owner invests in additional measures to increase the probability of capturing the return of his assets. Traditional analysis has viewed transfers of this sort, thieving, as altering the distribution of income without affecting output, since the total amount of goods in society remains unchanged. Thus, if A steals B's car, traditional analysis says that no social loss has occurred. Now, apply this again. It's the thievery of government that's in the background here, okay? It's the thievery of government, assuming the value of both individuals is equal. But this ignores the consumption of resources in A's attempts to carry out the theft, government, and B's attempts to prevent it, us. The transfer itself may be costless, but the prospect of the transfer leads individuals and groups to invest resources in either attempting to obtain a transfer or to resist a transfer away from themselves. These resources represent net social waste. That's a quote from the book. And then they continue. In short, writes the author at Mises, expenditures on predatory and protective activities constitute the waste, the net negative, that makes the total less than the sum of its parts. However, as Austrians have argued from several viewpoints, Ludwig von Mises's book, Human Action, Peter Klein's essays and research of Nikolai Voss et al., the structure of ownership is itself an integral component of a society's wealth. If assets are owned by individuals who put them to poor use, wealth is relatively diminished. Unlike non-voluntary transfers, exchanges that arise voluntarily in the market are the mechanism by which ownership passes to those most qualified to use it ex ante. Thus, the new distribution itself constitutes a loss of value compared to that which existed previously, irrespective of the resources expended on predatory and protective activities. And I wanted to bring this up in the macro sense when I was looking at this earlier, because again, if you're thinking about an atmosphere in which to invest, just think about people who used to be attracted to Hong Kong and what happened in Hong Kong, right? Again, the idea that Robert Higgs brought up during World War II, how Roosevelt did not pull people out and World War II did not pull people out of the Great Depression, because business people who did still have assets that they could turn liquid and invest were afraid to do so because they weren't sure what the regime structure would be like. They had regime uncertainty. They weren't sure whether they were going to be preyed upon if they tried to enter business, whether the mafia was going to bang on their door and say, nice place you got here, in Roosevelt's patrician accent, right? Oh, nice place you've got here. The only thing you have to fear is another visit from us, so hand over your money. Now, these non-voluntary transfers, right? Transfers of opportunities, transfers of accumulated wealth, transfers of opportunities to employ people, which then would expand wealth, transfers of people being able to make decisions for themselves on the consumer side. They just mount up and mount up and mount up. So I just wanted to read that section because it's exponential, at least geometric, because there are so many things that are dependent on the reliability of property rights not to be infringed. That when you get the welfare state, you get transfer of funds, and then, of course, you get people who become reliant on the transfer of funds, and you get gaming of the system for certain companies, like some of these companies we see here who play favorites with the government, right? The banking system, all that stuff, all of it becomes gamed and they start to devote resources rather than being inventive and doing R&D. They start devoting resources on how to game the system. Hence, mRNA jabs. Yeah, they're totally fine, very safe. We got the bird flu, right? Are you chicken of the bird flu? Yeah. So let's turn to some of the more immediate history. So, and I'm going to recap again those Supreme Court cases and the name of the book after I just refer you to this book in our scholarship section here. This is, of course, Social Justice Fallacies by Thomas Sowell, just released. And if you turn to page 36, he has some very good information here. He writes, prominent economist Richard T. Ely, E-L-Y, for example, rejected free market economics because he saw government, he's sort of hovering around the 1930s, 1940s, heading towards the 1960s, okay? And the Johnson administration, the progressives, the growth of the progressives. Prominent economist Richard T. Ely, for example, rejected free market economics because he saw government power as something to be applied, quote, to the amelioration of the conditions under which people live or work. Sort of sounds like yesterday when they were talking about the debit cards for New York, and they said that it will allow people to make choices with their own resources. That was quaint, wasn't it? Yeah, that was awesome. I feel like Chris Farley. That was awesome. So he believed that it would be the amelioration under the conditions under which people live or work, Richard T. Ely said. Well, writes Thomas Sowell, far from seeing government power as a threat to freedom, Ely said, quote, regulation by the power of the state of these industrial and other social relations existing among men is a condition of freedom. Well, yeah, if you're not involved in politics, the free market allows people to decide. And generally, they steer away from places that are bad news and steer away from products that are bad news. And employers have to compete for employees, just like they have to compete for consumers. They don't want to mistreat the consumers, and generally speaking, they don't want to mistreat their employees. Because in a thriving market, people will have money left over to invest in a new company to allow people to get away from this screwed up company. Yeah, isn't that funny? It's weird the way it works. Freedom is just wacky. Ely favored, quote, public ownership and municipal utilities, highways, and railroads, and declared that, quote, labor unions should be legally encouraged in their efforts for shorter hours and higher wages. Well, that'll be really good for the consumer, won't it? Oh, we've gotten that, haven't we? Yeah, we got that. And that inheritance and income taxes should be generally extended. That's taxes on inheritance. Hello, Karl Marx. And income taxes. Don't forget, they want a 90% income tax in France on the so-called rich. I don't know. Is it Rich Little? I don't know. Richard Dawson? I'm not sure. Eugenics was to Ely just another social benefit. He was classy, and he wanted that provided by government as well. Professor Ely was clearly a man of the left and has been called the father of institutional economics, a branch of economics long noted for its opposition to free market economics. One of Ely's students, John R. Commons, became a leading institutional economist at the University of Wisconsin. Professor Commons, ironically named, rejected free market competition because, quote, competition has no respect for the superior races, end quote, so that the, quote, race with lowest necessities displaces others, end quote. Among Ely's other students was the iconic progressive president of the United States, Woodrow Wilson. President Wilson, too, saw some races as inferior. He approved of the annexation of Puerto Rico by President William McKinley before him, saying of those annexed, quote, they are children and we are men in these deep matters of government and justice, end quote. Wilson's own administration segregated Black employees of federal agencies in Washington And he showed the movie Birth of a Nation, glorifying the Ku Klux Klan in the White House to invited guests. Writes Thomas Sowell some more. Like other progressives of his time and later times, Woodrow Wilson saw no dangers to freedom in an expansion of government power, whether through the creation of new federal agencies like the Federal Trade Commission and the Federal Reserve System during his own administration, or through the appointment of federal judges who would interpret the Constitution so as to loosen what President Wilson regarded as excessive restriction on the powers of government. In his book, The New Freedom, Woodrow Wilson arbitrarily defined government benefits as a new form of freedom, thereby verbally finessing away concerns about expanding powers of government being a threat to people's freedom. This redefinition of freedom has persisted among various later advocates of expanding welfare state powers into the 21st century. Thank you, Thomas Sowell. Among other prominent scholars of the early progressive era who were clearly on the political left, along with advocating eugenics, was the already mentioned Professor Edward A. Ross, who was regarded as one of the founders of the profession of sociology in the United States. Professor Ross referred to, quote, us liberals, end quote, as people who speak up, quote, for public interests against powerful, selfish, private interests, end quote. Of course, they were usurping the term liberals because that meant libertas and freedom. And he denounced those who disagreed with his own views as unworthy. They were kept spokesmen for special interests, not the special interest of the state working with its special interests. They were mercenaries. And he contrasted that with us champions of the social welfare, because they could decide what your welfare is. See, it's all great. It's elitism. It's awesome. And remember, Joe Biden hates those elitists. In their own minds, at least, these early 20th century progressives were advocating so-called social justice. And Roscoe Pound used that specific phrase. There is no need to question Ross's sincerity. Of course, he mentioned that before we came in here, as he questioned other people's sincerity. People can be very sincere when presupposing their own superiority. Right, Joe? Madison Grant, whose book Hitler called his Bible, was likewise a staunch progressive of the early 20th century. While not an academic scholar, neither was he an ignorant redneck. He was from a wealthy family in New York, and he was educated at Yale and the Columbia University Law School. He was an activist in progressive causes, kind of like Liz Warren, and the creation of, such as conservation, preserving endangered species, municipal reform, government, new policies, and the creation of, you got it, national parks. Thank you so much, Antiquities Act of 1909. You're awesome. He was welcomed into an exclusive social club established by, you got it, Theodore Roosevelt. And during the 1920s, he exchanged friendly letters with Franklin D. Roosevelt, addressing him in those letters as my dear Frank, while FDR reciprocated by addressing him as my dear Madison. In short, the progressives of the early 20th century shared more than a name with progressives of a later era, extending on into our times. While these different generations of progressives reached opposite conclusions on the reasons for racial differences in economic and social outcomes, they shared very similar views on the role of government in general and judges in particular. They also had similar practices in dealing with empirical evidence. Both remained largely impervious to evidence or conclusions contrary to their own beliefs. In addressing one of the central issues in early 20th century America, the massive increase in immigration from Eastern Europe to Southern Europe that began in the 1880s, the progressives went beyond claiming that the current generation of immigrants was less productive or less advanced than the previous generations from Western Europe and Northern Europe. The progressives' claim was that Eastern Europeans and Southern Europeans were inherently genetically and therefore permanently inferior, whether in the future or the past. And Thomas Sowell, of course, has many books on immigration and the great benefits of immigration and how different generations rise to the top after their parents emigrate someplace. And it's really remarkable, some of the stuff he did. Now, I just want to reread you that little bit about the court cases and the name of the book, Terry Anderson and Peter Hill's book, which is called The Birth of a Transfer Society, published in 1989. You can see it right there. And that's the Amazon link if you're listening in audio, to be redundant, if you're just getting audio. And again, we have the 5 that they mention. Marbury versus Madison, we got judicial review, striking down the laws that they considered unconstitutional. I don't see that as necessarily not allowed by their vaunted constitution. But as an anarchist, I shouldn't be forcing anybody to pay for anything, including the Supreme Court and people to interpret the Constitution or claim that it's the law of the land. Then McCulloch v. Maryland in 1819, as, of course, this is Edward Boucher writes, which sanctioned Congress's founding of the Bank of the United States and deemed that states couldn't tax instruments of the federal government and further solidified the basis for judicial review. The third is Ogden, the Ogden v. Saunders 1827 case, which ended the old laissez-faire interpretation of the contract clause, which really was supposed to stop states from interfering in private contract and would have prevented tons and tons of regulatory appliances brought down by state governments. Then, of course, there was the fourth one, Munn v. Illinois of 1877, which for the first time granted the state the power to control private property via the so-called public interest argument. And then 5, U.S. v. Grimaud. And by the way, that Munn v. Illinois was the precursor to the 1846 Marsh v. Alabama case. I'll have to go into that a little bit more sometime. And it came around just at the time that there was the big push for the antitrust stuff. So it's all sort of mixed in. And then the 5th one, U.S. v. Grimaud of 1911, which gave administrative rulings the force of law, beginning the transfer of lawmaking function from Congress to the president, which brings us right up to last week and the push down of the Chevron standard. So I hope that's a good update for you, and I hope that's some solid info. If I have the time tomorrow, I'll break this out and make it its own video, and I hope it's been valuable for you. And again, if you're watching after the fact, please time code this. If you think this is valuable for students, they might be interested in it. You think they might want to know about these books. Feel free to, grab the books and we can have conversations about those things. That'd be great. And I recommend everything Thomas Sowell has written, and actually everything Anderson and Lee has written, like all their stuff. So hope it's been good for you tonight, everybody. And I'll try to get this out tomorrow, and it's a separate thing. I don't know if I'll be able to do that. I'll have the audio over at my Substack as well. And again, Risha M., prayers going out to you and your family. And also, Melanie, thanks for being there. I hope you had a great weekend, Melanie. I'm very curious to find out how it was. Freegan, great to have the dancing banana in there, my friend. Thank you so much. And really good to have you here, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, everybody's, I like what Risham says. Got to have the humor, man. It's been deep today. Well, more power to you, Risha. Really appreciate it. TC, great to have you there. Hey, Tom, I'm interested to see what you think of the Addicts. Those British guys. They live out in L.A. now, around L.A. I think they're down more like on the coast, like near San Diego and stuff. But I really like these guys. They're a lot of fun, man. And I see they played at the same festival as the Damned, Suicidal Tendencies, the Specials, a bunch of great bands, man. Just like, wow, that must have been, it was called the No Values Festival. And it just looked like it was so much fun. I would love to go to that. So we've got a lot going on, everybody. Tom says, much love to all in the chat. Stay safe out there and have a great rest of your night. I think that's a perfect way to say it. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, man. It's really cool to know you people everywhere. It's really, really cool. And whether I've spoken to you, online in conversations or, just reading text and chat, appreciate everybody watching on X as well. Again, if you find the show valuable, please spread the word. Of course, you can support the show. If you go to my Substack, I put the PayPal connection in there. You can always donate also on Rokfin and on Rumble. And for those people who want to subscribe, from what I gather, Rokfin doesn't take a percentage out of the monthly subscribers who sign up over there. And yes, after speaking with Gary of Nerdrotic, I was texting some stuff on their chat on Sunday. Gary, I'm going to try to connect with Gary. I'm going to start that entertainment channel. So I'm really looking forward to that and maybe devoting some more time to just lighten the load. And, it won't just be my voice. Obviously we'll be getting guests on Liberty Conspiracy and stuff. And we present a lot of video coverage. So it's sort of me and you sitting back watching a lot of these things as we gather the info. But I love getting interview subjects, opening up the lines at least once a week to you on Liberty Conspiracy. I'm going to try to do that. Get you, if you want to call in, that'll be great as well. It'll be really, really fun. So news gathering, news review, breaking it apart, awesome guests, inviting you, and then that entertainment show. I'm not sure what day I might do it. Not really sure. Maybe a Sunday night, maybe. And then another thing midweek as a pre-recorded show. Live Sunday night, I'm not sure. But we'll talk script writing, new stuff that's coming out in TV, great stuff for principles and morals and things like that I think are really enriching. Books, the style of fiction composition, that sort of thing. So we'll go into a lot of that, and we'll talk about film editing and soundtracks and a lot of things like that. Meantime, I'm going to give you a little something that is going to give us our going away, and it's time. It's time for the going away. So let's go with outro number 2, King Kong. And again, thanks, everybody. We'll see you over at the Substack. The audio will be out there. And for everyone, I hope you have a terrific night. Tomorrow night, I got something interesting to share from James Corbett. Quite interesting. He's got a Substack. I hope you check that out, too. Peace, love, togetherness. God bless everyone. Have a great night. See you.